House of Commotion, Chapter 2. The cracks slowly begin to show. The nights became longer for Jake. Sleep became a stranger. Every time he closed his eyes, the faces of two women appeared. Folake on one side, Gloria on the other, both loving him, both trusting him, and both completely unaware of the other. Jake would lie awake in bed staring at the ceiling of his beautiful American home, the air conditioning humming softly, Gloria sleeping peacefully beside him, and yet his mind would be thousands of miles away in Lagos. He would picture Folake sitting alone in their modest living room, waiting for his call. He would picture Shade sitting at her desk studying hard, believing that her father was sacrificing everything for their future. And then he would turn his head and see Gloria lying next to him. This kind and beautiful woman who gave him everything, who loved him without condition, who bore him two beautiful children, and who had absolutely no idea that her entire marriage was built on a foundation of lies. The guilt was no longer just a feeling. It had become a weight, a physical heaviness that sat on his chest every single day. It followed him to work. It followed him to the dinner table. It followed him into the shower. It followed him into his dreams. Jake was trapped inside a prison of his own making, and the walls were closing in. He would sometimes sit alone in his car in the parking lot after work, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel, just thinking about what he had done, thinking about what he was still doing, thinking about what would happen if the truth ever came out. He played the scenarios in his head over and over again. What would Folake say? What would Gloria do? What would Shade think of him? What would Clara and Jason understand? Every scenario ended the same way: destruction, pain, loss. And so, Jake did what he had been doing for years. He pushed the thoughts down. He swallowed the guilt. He put on his mask. And he kept living the lie. But what Jake did not understand was that lies have an expiration date. No matter how carefully you hide them, no matter how perfectly you perform, no matter how many years go by, the truth has a way of rising to the surface like oil on water. And the cracks were already beginning to show. It started with something small, something that most people would not even notice. But Gloria noticed. One night after a long day, Jake and Gloria were getting ready for bed. The children were already asleep. The house was quiet. Gloria was sitting on the edge of the bed, removing her earrings. When Jake walked out of the bathroom, his mind clearly somewhere else. He looked at Gloria, but his eyes seemed distant, like he was looking through her instead of at her. Gloria smiled at him and said good night, and Jake, without thinking, without realizing what he was saying, responded softly, "Good night, Folake." The name slipped out of his mouth like water through a crack in a dam. Soft, quiet, but loud enough for Gloria to hear every single letter. Gloria froze. Her hands stopped moving. Her smile disappeared. She turned slowly and looked at Jake with an expression that was a mixture of confusion, surprise, and something deeper, something that looked like the very first seed of suspicion being planted in her heart. "Who is Folake?" she asked quietly. Jake's blood ran cold. His heart stopped for a full second. He felt the ground shift beneath his feet. His mind raced at 1,000 miles per hour, trying to find an explanation, trying to find a cover, trying to find anything that would undo what he had just done. He forced a laugh, a nervous, hollow laugh that did not reach his eyes. He told Gloria it was nobody, just a name from a movie he had been watching earlier, a Nigerian movie. He said the name must have stuck in his head. Gloria stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for the truth. Jake held her gaze, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. After what felt like an eternity, Gloria slowly nodded. She did not say anything else. She turned off her bedside lamp and lay down with her back facing him. Jake stood there in the dim light, his hands trembling slightly, his forehead damp with sweat. He had escaped, but barely, and he knew that the crack had just appeared. From that night forward, something shifted in Gloria. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. She did not bring up the name Folake again. She did not ask any more questions about it, but her eyes changed. There was a new layer behind her warm brown eyes, a layer of quiet observation. She began to watch Jake more carefully. Not in an obvious way, not in a suspicious or confrontational way. Gloria was far too intelligent for that. She watched him the way a detective watches a suspect. Calmly, patiently, taking mental notes and filing them away. She noticed that Jake had started keeping his phone closer to him than usual. He used to leave it on the kitchen counter or on the coffee table, without a care in the world. Now he carried it everywhere, even to the bathroom. She noticed that he would sometimes step outside to take phone calls, something he never used to do. He would walk to the backyard or sit in his car and talk in hushed tones, and when he came back inside, he would act like nothing happened. She noticed that he had become more distracted during dinner. The children would be talking to him, and he would not hear them. Clara would call his name 2 or 3 times before he responded. Jason would show him a drawing, and Jake would glance at it and nod. Without really looking, Gloria noticed all of this. Every single detail. She stored it all in her mind like pieces of a puzzle she was not yet ready to solve. Because despite everything she was noticing, Gloria still loved Jake deeply. She had given him her heart, her home, her body, and her trust. She had built her entire life around this man, and the thought that something might be wrong, that something might be hidden, was a thought she was not ready to fully face. So she pushed it aside. She told herself she was overthinking. She told herself Jake was just stressed from work. She told herself that every marriage goes through difficult seasons, and this was just one of them. But deep down, in a place she was not yet willing to visit, Gloria knew that something was not right. A woman always knows, even when she chooses not to acknowledge it. Something in her spirit, something in her gut, was whispering to her that the man sleeping beside her every night was carrying a secret that could shatter everything she had ever believed about their love. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic Ocean, in the bustling and noisy city of Lagos, Nigeria, a different kind of suspicion was growing. Folake had always been a woman of faith, a woman who believed in her husband, a woman who held her head high in her community, because she believed that her man was out there in America, working hard to build a better life for their family. Whenever her friends or neighbors asked about Jake, Folake would smile proudly and say that her husband was doing well in America, and that very soon he would send for them. She would talk about Jake with so much love and admiration that people around her could see the pride radiating from her face. She was the wife of a man in America, and in her community that meant something. It meant that better days were coming. It meant that the suffering was temporary. It meant that one day she and Shade would board a plane and join Jake in the land of opportunity. That belief was what kept Folake going through the hard days. It was what kept her strong when the money was not enough. It was what kept her smiling when she should have been crying. It was her anchor, her hope, her reason for waking up every morning. But then the whispers started. It began at the market. Folake had gone to buy tomatoes and pepper from her usual seller, a woman named Mama Tolu, who knew everybody and everything that happened in the neighborhood. Mama Tolu was the kind of woman who had information before it even happened. She knew who was getting married, who was getting divorced, who was owing rent, and who was sleeping with whose husband. Mama Tolu greeted Folake warmly that afternoon, and as she was measuring the tomato, she said something that made Folake's hands go cold. She said she heard that Jake was living very well in America, very well indeed, and that she heard he was not living alone. Folake looked at Mama Tolu with a steady expression and asked her what she meant by that. Mama Tolu smiled, that knowing smile that gossipers smile when they have a juicy piece of information but want to appear like they are not the ones spreading it. She said, "Oh, nothing, oh. I am just saying what people are saying. You know how people talk." Folake felt something shift inside her chest. A tiny crack, a hairline fracture in the wall of trust she had built around her marriage. But she quickly sealed it. She told Mama Tolu that people will always talk and that her husband was a faithful and God-fearing man. She paid for her tomatoes and walked away with her head held high. But her hands were shaking. The whispers did not stop at the market. They followed her to church. One Sunday after service, a group of women were standing outside chatting, and when Folake walked past, she noticed the way they suddenly lowered their voices and changed the subject. She noticed the way one of them looked at her with pity in her eyes. Pity, not admiration, not envy. Pity. Folek felt her stomach tighten, but she greeted them warmly and walked on. On another occasion, her neighbor Auntie BC came to visit, and during their conversation she casually mentioned that these days men who travel abroad sometimes start new families there. She said it in a general way, not directly about Jake, but the way she looked at Folek while saying it made the message very clear. Folek responded firmly. She said her husband was not that kind of man. She said Jake loved her and Shade, and that everything he was doing in America was for their benefit. Auntie BC nodded and changed the subject, but the damage was already done. The seed had been planted, not just by one person but by many. And even though Folek refused to water that seed, even though she refused to let it grow, it was there, sitting in the soil of her heart, waiting. But if Folek was choosing to look away, her daughter Shade was choosing to look directly at the truth. Shade was no longer the 16-year-old girl who was sent home from school with tears in her eyes. She had grown. She was now a young woman, sharp, intelligent, observant, and increasingly frustrated. For years she had accepted her father's absence. She had believed the story that he was working in America to build a better future for them. She had prayed for him every night. She had defended him when other children in school mocked her for having a father who never came home. She had held on to the belief that one day her father would return and everything would be all right. But as the years passed and Jake never came back, not even once, the belief started to weaken. Questions started forming in Shade's mind, questions that she had pushed aside for too long. Why had her father never come back to visit them? Not even for Christmas, not even for her birthday, not even when her grandmother was sick. He always had an excuse: work, immigration issues, money. There was always a reason why he could not come. And Shade had accepted every single one of them, until now. Shade started paying closer attention to her father's phone calls. She noticed that Jake always called at specific times, always late at night in Nigeria, which meant it was evening in America. She noticed that the calls were becoming shorter. He used to talk for an hour. Now it was 20 minutes, sometimes 15. She noticed that he always seemed distracted during their conversations, like his mind was somewhere else, like he was listening with one ear while the other ear was tuned into something else, something or someone else. One night after Jake called and spoke briefly with Folek, Shade sat on her bed in her small room and stared at the ceiling. Her pillow was damp. It was always damp these days, not because of the Lagos heat, but because of the tears she cried every night. Tears that she never let her mother see. Tears that she swallowed in the daytime and released in the darkness of her room. She missed her father. She missed him so deeply that it physically hurt. There was an ache in her chest that never went away. A hollow space where her father's presence should have been. She remembered when she was little and Jake would carry her on his shoulders and she would feel like she was on top of the world. She remembered when he would help her with her homework and call her my brilliant girl. She remembered the way he smelled, the way he laughed, the way he made everything feel safe. And now all she had were phone calls that lasted 15 minutes and promises that never came true. That night, Shade made a decision. She was going to find out the truth. No more waiting, no more hoping, no more crying into her pillow and praying for answers. She was going to go out and find those answers herself. She did not know where to start. She did not know what she would find. And honestly, she was terrified of what the truth might look like. But she was more terrified of spending the rest of her life living in the dark. She would rather face a painful truth than continue living in a comfortable lie. So Shade began to plan, quietly, secretly, without telling her mother. Because if what the neighbors and the market women were whispering was true, then her mother's world was about to come crashing down, and Shade wanted to be sure of the facts before she let that happen. Meanwhile, back in America, the cracks in Jake's carefully constructed double life were getting wider, and it was about to get much worse. It happened on a regular Tuesday evening. There was nothing special about the day. Gloria had cooked dinner. The children had eaten and gone to their rooms to do homework. Jake had taken a shower and changed into his house clothes. Everything was normal. Everything was routine, until Gloria decided to do laundry. She gathered the clothes from the bedroom, the bathroom, and the laundry basket. She checked the pockets of Jake's trousers, the way she always did before putting them in the washing machine, because Jake had a habit of leaving receipts, coins, and sometimes his earphones in his pockets. She reached into the pocket of his dark gray trousers, the ones he had worn to work that day. Her fingers touched something small, something thin and hard. She pulled it out and looked at it. It was a SIM card, a Nigerian SIM card. Gloria stood in the laundry room, holding that tiny piece of plastic between her fingers and staring at it as if it were a bomb. Her mind started racing. Why would Jake have a Nigerian SIM card hidden in his pocket? He had an American phone number. He had an American phone plan. Why would he need a Nigerian SIM card? And more importantly, why was it hidden? Not in his phone, not in his wallet, but tucked deep inside the pocket of his trousers, like a secret he was trying to keep from the world. Gloria's hands began to tremble. Her heart began to beat faster. That whisper in her gut, the one she had been ignoring for weeks, the one she had been pushing aside and telling herself was nothing, that whisper suddenly became a scream. She stood there in the laundry room for a long time, the washing machine humming beside her, the house quiet around her, the SIM card sitting in her palm like a tiny grenade waiting to explode. She did not confront Jake that night. She did not mention it. She did not show him what she found. Instead, she did something far more calculated. She put the SIM card back exactly where she found it. She folded the trousers and placed them back in the closet, and she carried on with her evening as if nothing had happened. She kissed Jake goodnight. She smiled at him. She lay beside him in bed, but her eyes were wide open in the darkness, and her mind was working. Because Gloria had made a decision of her own. She was not going to ask Jake for the truth. She was going to find it herself. 2 women, 2 continents, 2 separate investigations, both moving closer and closer to the same devastating truth. And Jake, the man at the center of it all, had no idea that the walls of his double life were about to come crashing down around him. The cracks had appeared, and they were spreading fast. The question was no longer if the truth would come out. The question was when. And when it does, will anyone be left standing? Will the shocking truth that has been hidden for years finally be revealed in Chapter 3? Stay tuned.
Because the House of Commotion is just getting started.